All right, sit back, relax. It's time for another Laneway Talks.
Glyn Mason, thanks for coming along today at Laneway headquarters for an interview about your musical career.
Yeah.
I'd like to start with asking, where are you from originally, and how did you, from a very early age, get into music?
Well, first off, I was originally born in Nottingham, UK, so I'm English heritage, and my folks immigrated in 1952 to Australia. Dad was one of the 10 quitters post-war, where they had a relocation program for service people, and they could go and basically anywhere in the world to live, and it just cost them 10 quid. So Dad came out to Australia, and we settled originally in Richmond, which is where they had a whole bunch of the kind of round tin sort of army huts that they used to have. And then my folks started their long journey of getting employment and all that kind of stuff. Mum worked at the GMH plant out at Dandenong, and Dad was relocated because he was actually still in the service. So he ended up working at the RAAF barracks in St Kilda Road as a clerk. So that's the story of the relocation program where I came from, so to speak. But my father was a Welshman and sang in the church choir in Pontypridd, where his father worked in the graveyards there. After, I might add, the years when many of the Welsh, as you know, were down the mines. So Dad was down the mines when he was 11 years old, doing his bit down there for the effort, so to speak, and trying to stay alive with the family. But he had a great voice.
Well, many a famous Welsh band, one of my favourites being Man, who was only listening to the other night.
Sure.
It stands true that some very nice rock bands came out of Wales.
Well, rock bands, and then their legacy, of course, is all the vocal harmony stuff in the church choirs and Men of Harlech and all that kind of historical stuff. So I grew up listening to that, and Dad at parties, because Mum was a honky-tonk piano player as well, and from England. And so, I had all these kind of strange uncles and aunties that, of course, become your uncle and auntie when they're just friends of the family. So wherever they relocated to, they'd end up having these social nights. Well, of course, Uncle Harry would be on the pots and pans, and Mum would be on the piano, and Dad would be singing his heart out, right? So I grew up with that, and that led from the era when, you had the crooners and the ballad singers, etc., from that big band era. And then, of course, it started, rock and roll. The phrase or the terminology begun out of the States, with most of the people, I'm sure, all the listeners and everything are fairly aware of. But I really didn't get into much of that until the music explosion of the early 60s. I knew that stuff was on the radio because you'd hear Bill Haley and you'd hear, Presley and people like that. And even earlier. But a lot of it didn't really make much sense to me, and I wasn't really kind of that captivated by it because I wasn't really listening to it. When I was at the beginning at school, intermediate school as it was in New Zealand then, this is after living in Australia, 52. Dad got a job in New Zealand in 58, and we went over there and lived for 11 years. So that's pretty much where the whole musical world for me really started to turn on, because that giant worldwide explosion of everybody that you and I could sit here and talk about for hours really kind of kicked in. All the changes in America with the folk singers and Bob Dylan and all that stuff coming out, politically diverse and not correct, and according to most of the Americans. And then you had the English explosion following not soon after, from their kind of blues guys that were following a lot of the American blues stuff like Alexi Korn and those kind of dudes. So all of that started to build their shift up in England. You had John Mayall and the Blues Breakers and all that kind of stuff.
And what was your first real band? And what I mean by that, where you thought, we could be paid to play. What was your first?
Not too much later. I was pretty much at high school when that sort of moment that period started to turn around. One of my friends at school was a really excellent natural guitar player. He was already on the stage when he was 11 years old. And he showed me some chords and stuff because all of the music was starting to dig in. The Beatles were on the radio. guys and gals, and, you know, everybody wanted to be in a band. Oh, let's do this, you know, from the shadows on, I might add. You know, so all of that was kicking up in New Zealand just like it was right around the world. I think the time zone was fairly similar right around the world.
Did you know Mike Rudd around that time? Because he was in New Zealand.
Again, not too much later. So I came out of the high school thing. We'd played at a few local gigs, a few local halls. And in those days, it was just like Australia. Somebody would go and hire the local church hall. Oh, we're going to make a few bucks out of this. Put on a couple of the footy players as security, charge them, $5 or probably $2 or, what was it in those days?
Probably 20 cents.
Yeah, 20 cents or two, whatever it would be, 15 shillings, and get the crew along. So you'd have guys, in the full suited bands, all fitted out with red fenders and stuff, imitating Hank Marvin tunes and all that kind of stuff. And then it moved on to the bands playing Beatles songs because the explosion had happened. And then it went from them doing Stone songs and Pretty Things, and then,
So this is where you cut your teeth, and then
correct.
We get to...
Well, I left high school and went to art school, Wellington Polytechnic. And at that point, and as it later happened, I was bunking classes to try and go and play because they weren't teaching me properly at the Polytechnic. They were spending a lot of time with those kids who basically would be really good, and not enough with people like myself who really weren't that good, or we were on the bottom of the A class, for example. So anyway, eventually I told my folks, look, don't worry about this. I'm not going anymore. Don't bother about funding it. I'm going to go and get a job, which I did. And so pretty much around about that time, I was in this band called The Jigsaw, and nothing to do with Johnny Chester, I might add, and over there. And we were playing around locally around Wellington in the North Island, the capital. And then, as were 90 zillion other bands and artists playing around the time. So, we were playing for a few bucks then, but I had no, I had no forward desire that was going to be my life and I was going to play for money and this is all I was ever going to do. It just didn't occur to me at the time. And then as I left art school and I was working straight gigs, of course, I started playing more gigs. And then one day, some guys there came to ask me to play. The Jigsaw was, doing its thing. And they said, oh, well, look, we're going out on the road and that, do you want to come and sort of play guitar in the band? And it was an outfit called The Bitter End. And that was my first pro gig being actually out on the road, period, forever. So that's kind of where that kicked.
Okay. And then you moved to, I think, the Rebels?
Well, basically The Bitter End, and then that went through sort of some changes. The Jigsaw kind of reformed, so to speak, at a later date. And we were shifted up to Auckland and we were playing a lot of the traps around there and the band was pretty damn fine, I might add, at that particular point. Again, as were a lot of the New Zealand sort of musicians. So the whole thing there was coming of age. So anyway, and there was a lot more camaraderie, I might add, amongst it. It wasn't sort of like a serious sort of competitive aspect to the music industry until it became an industry. So over there, everyone just used to go to parties and rock on. And the guys from the Rebels were friends of ours. Anyway, they came down on one of the gigs we were playing one day. This is heading towards about 68, going into 69. And they said, oh, look, unfortunately, Larry's being, shall we say, contained and he can't sing for the band. Do you want to sing for the band? And I said, well, look, I'm in a pretty good band now.
Were you singing in Jigsaw or you were singing in guitar?
No, I was just singing in Jigsaw, that particular version. Yeah. Originally, I was playing guitar, but the second Jigsaw version, I just sang.
So if it's 68, 69 that you partake in some gigs with the Rebels and
I joined
recording.
Right, because Larry quietly, just as I said, got detained. So I said, well, what's in it? What are you doing? And they said, well, we're doing an album. We're not just interested in singing. We want you to, we're interested, do you write any songs? And I said, well, I haven't really made a giant effort in it, but I'll give it a crack, And that's with some fledgling sort of moments of me writing some songs. Anyway, so I joined the band. We did a tour. We had a #1 single from that album called My Son John, which was a British pop track, and then came to Australia. Now, they'd already been here about 4 to 5 times with Larry up front singing as Larry's Rebels, and they were quite big in Australia and they were huge in New Zealand. They were like a number one act in New Zealand, very popular. And anyway, so I went, I'm in. So we did that whole process took about over 9 months, just about, I think. The album, the tour, and then we came to Australia.
Okay. And you came to Australia as the Rebels and obviously did some shows, but not too many?
No, like we just went straight into it. Like, you know, what had been happening for years was a trade-off, bouncing talent between New Zealand and Australia. Bands from Australia would go there and they would link up with the agents there, and bands from New Zealand would come by and link up with the agents, used to talk to each other. So Ray Columbus and the Invaders were coming over, Al Morrison Quartet, blah, 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 Max Merritt and the Meteors.
Leo DeCastro?
Leo came in what I call the first exodus of talent from New Zealand around about 67, I think, somewhere around there. And that whole first bunch included, like, you know, Dinah Lee, Max Merritt, Leo, and a bunch of other sort of acts that came over and had been coming over, I might add, some of them.
So how long did the Rebels last in Australia?
Just over a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we arrived in March of 69, and I think just by almost the start of the following year it was over. Not because we weren't working. Everybody was working. We used to do 5 or 6 gigs a week, no problems, as did everybody. It was we walked into an incredibly healthy era. Right? Australia was like massive. And when I got here then, I think my next door neighbour at the moment, Rob Greaves, writes editorials about music and bits and pieces for 2 Act Times. And he wrote a massive kind of historical content article about music in Australia around that period. And there was more than like 50 gigs plus in Melbourne at the time. That was just rock and roll gigs, never mind anything else. So it was like huge. And I mean, we were working heaps. Anyway, that busted up and I joined Chain.
That was in 69, Chain?
Later 69 going into the start of 70.
So straight into recording with Chain?
Pretty much, yeah, because we did the first live album then and a couple of singles off it, bits and pieces. And then the guys decided that they wanted to go and try and crack it up in Sydney.
Who are you referring to?
Well, in the band then was Phil Manning, Warren Morgan, Barry Harvey and Barry Sullivan.
Some big names there, Glyn.
Well, they were the pretty much the originals. And what had happened was that they had Wendy Saddington singing with them up in Sydney. And part of my history becomes a little bit disjointed there, but I jammed with them at the first outdoor festival ever in Sydney at Arimba, right? And we just sort of went our own ways with stuff. I hung about Sydney for a while. I don't know why I was there, but I hung about. And then I came back to Melbourne. And when Wendy left up there, those 4 guys came down to Melbourne, and that's when I joined. They asked me to join the band.
I mean, you must have been pretty stoked. You've been, okay, with the Rebels, who, as you said, had number one in New Zealand, and had a lot of gigs here, and you join a year later.
But I think that's what I was trying to say to you before. There was a lot of more interaction between members of bands in those days. You were all mates.
But what I'm trying to get at is how you felt and how your career was going, because you were moving on from one well-known act to another well-known act.
Yeah, moderately so. And I had played the blues a lot in New Zealand before I joined the Rebels, right? Like Jigsaw, we used to do all of the stuff that was kind of blues orientated around that period of time I was telling you. So anywhere from John Mayall to Hendrix to, you know, the stuff that was coming out of the UK, and then basically the Chicago blues stuff that we were into. Because basically blues prior to that sort of urban world wasn't electric. It was mainly the stuff that you know, Muddy Waters and so forth. It later became electric and moved into those areas we had, you know, Junior Wells and all. He played quite a bit of that stuff over there. It was kind of very big in New Zealand.
Well, how did you enjoy the Chain experience?
Look, you know what? I mean, I think I've loved every outfit that I've ever been involved in, because I've learned something from everybody in all of those bands and all that music as the years have gone by. And I grant myself being very fortunate to be able to sustain work. Now, in between some of the bands, I just took on regular day jobs, you know, like chipping concrete off things with jackhammers and crap, just to stay alive. But that sort of period never seemed to end, never seemed to last too long. And before you know it, some other band would be saying, oh, well, no, we're going to do this, do you want to come and play? Or whatever. And then in a couple of instances, I sort of semi-formed my own bands, right, which were like Home and much later.
We'll move to them. So we got Chain, and so you would Chain for about a year and a half?
They wanted to go to try and play in Sydney and work. Well, they had been in touch with an agent up there who said, well, look, you do this and make a move to come up and I'll sort of I'll look after you. Well, we went through to Newcastle direct first because we were able to get a residency at a club there at the bus stop, right? And so we went up and we stayed there for a month. And the owner of the gig used to rent out a house to every band that came through to play there. So we stayed up there and played there and tried to write a lot more material and then build the band. Well, of course, that might have been fine, but then eventually when we ended up in Sydney, we couldn't get enough work and the agent sort of really wasn't working with us that well from my memory, and it just didn't work. So the band split up, right? And the guys went west and I went overseas, basically for a year and a half or more, in actual fact.
What did you actually do overseas? Just hang out or play?
No, I played. Yeah. I played. I just arrived there. I had nothing to hold me in Australia, so no.
So where would you play, or did you get a band together over there?
No. Well, what happened around that time, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but so I went over there. Shane, by the way, just to finish that little episode, they went on to be bigger than ever. That's when Matt Taylor joined, and they had Towards the Blues and Black and Blue and the whole thing, and they became juggernauts of the Australian sort of music industry in terms of legendary blues players and band and the band. And that was probably, really their most popular and biggest period in Australian music history, I'd say, for Chain. Anyway, I was overseas during that whole time. So when I arrived there, like most overseas people do when they go, you're an expat Aussie just when you step off the plane. So I went, okay, what am I going to do now? So out of all of the magazines, Melody Maker and NME and all this sort of stuff, I just went to the ads at the back. I went guitarist wanted or lead, singer or whatever. I went to try out with a few British bands. My memory of it was that in playing and trying to play with a few of these bands, Australian talent was about 80% higher in terms of its capability and musicianship. Only in the upper crust of the English music, the ones that were like cream and went to the top, were the brilliant bunch. Down here was this mire of, how many million people who were just not that good. There might have been one guy or gal that was...
And is that what led you to come back to Australia?
No. Well, what actually happened was that Doug Parkinson was over there because a lot of bands went to England one way or another. They either won the Hoadley's Battle of the Bands, or blah, 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 or some just went, we've got to get over into another market because we're dying.
Because Doug had a band, there was a band,
Fanny Adams,
which are so English, it's not funny.
Well, when I got there, I had Doug's number, and we got to know them in Australia. I'd got to know them just in division, not very well, but, we used to go and watch them play all the time, the Spectrum and blah, blah, blah. Everybody was kind of like friends. So anyway, he said, well, look, we're going over. This is like when I was in Chain. He said, we're going over and I'm going to try and get this thing going. So anyway, whatever happens, if you're over, just give us a buzz. So I gave him a call, went round, had a few cups of tea and points west, and then I said, well, look, man, I'm really not having any luck getting work. And he said, okay, well, why these friends of ours, the guitar players just left, which was Mick Lieber, all right, from, it might have been Python Lee Jackson on one of those bands, I can't remember which. But anyway, he'd left to join Ashton Gardner and Dyke, Resurrection Shuffle, remember that?
Fun.
So he said, why don't you go around and try out with these guys? Away I go. Well, the leader of the band is a guy called Frankie Boy Reid, who was a Ceylonese rock and roll singer doing Eddie Cochran songs and stuff like that. Very handsome looking dude, very sort of Elvis-like in his appearance, and a lovely bloke who was a mechanic during the day. On drums was David Montgomery from Python Lee Jackson, and the bass player was Tony Cahill from the Easy Beats, playing bass, who, I might add, was an exceptional bass player. Like, incredible bass player. So had a couple of rehearsals and away we went. Well, Frankie's moon was starting to descend, right, because he'd been really big over there with a mob called Frankie Boy Reed and the Casuals that played all the working men's clubs in England. He had like a 6-piece horn section and the whole thing going on. Well, of course, as time went by, you know, like a lot of musicians, you can't make a lot of dough. So, of course, this starts to drop away. I guess I'd better go back to my old trade. So, I ended up bloody working at Earl's Court, you know, the big show area where they have car shows and everything, lugging sacks of peas around in the catering department, trying to make a few bucks on top of the depleting gigs. So anyway, it was coming to a sort of defined end. And there was a lot of trouble over there, if you remember, around about that 71 period. Enoch Powers a member of Parliament advocating, stop the illegal immigrants and blah, blah, blah. The West End, people were going down there chucking balls through windows and bloody blowing up families and all sorts of stuff. I went, you know what? I don't really like the feel of this, man. I think I'm hightailing it. And I met a gal who later became my wife, just playing at a couple of pubs over there at Sourville Pub.
And she was an English, Australian.
Yeah. All that way, and I ended up with an Australian. Yeah. Anyway, so she said, well, me and my girlfriend, we're just going to, basically hitchhike back to Australia. And I went, well, can I join you? Because we were just friends at that point. So away we come. So all the way back to Australia, ending up in Darwin.
Now, what are we talking about? Is 71?
Heading sort of late 70.
Late 70.
Yeah, late 70.
So what happens throughout 70, late 70, what happens throughout 71?
Okay, so I'm back in Australia, right? And the guys from, I was working up there just for the local council in Darwin, and the guys in Chain found out that I was back in the country. So it was like that, the classic Blues Brothers thing, let's get the band back together.
Yeah.
Right? Well, we did, and I came back to Melbourne. So that version of Chain that I was in, that reformed. Matt had gone, and that band had broke up.
I think he'd gone to the commune, hadn't he?
Whatever he called it, yeah. I don't really know a lot about Matt's history, to tell you the truth, other than the fact that he's a super entertaining guy and a
lovely band.
Oh, but anyway, so I rejoined the band, another album, another couple of songs off it type of thing. But it was, probably somebody like yourself could have seen it from the outside. It was doomed to failure, right? Because all the guys have really gone different directions musically. LG was into like fairly serious, heavy jazz. BG, I think correctly, was struggling in sort of the areas, personally and other things. Phil was still, and Pete were still awesome players, the awesome players they were, but it was just too fragmented. So it was never going to stay together. So that folded, and just about then, I was living with Bill Putt from Ariel, right? Or Spectrum as it was then.
Yeah.
And the first Ariel had already folded.
First Ariel or Spectrum?
No, the first Ariel.
Back in 72?
Yeah, about sort of around there somewhere, because Michael had already gone over to England, as you know, with the first Ariel, with Harvey James and John Lee.
I thought that was 75, 76.
Well, it might have been, but
I think we're back here now. If we take it back to 70...
Honestly, I really can't. The chronological aspects of some of the things...
So, because I thought what happened, you got Chain back together, and then it was Home next. Then
might have been.
You moved into Home, and there was Home at Last, and then the second Home album. How did Home come together? And Home, to me, represents Australia's Eagles. It was an East Coast American sound.
Well, it was mainly country rock.
Which is Eagles, which is, what they do.
Yeah, my influences at that point were I was swinging the band, that band. I was sort of more into that kind of world.
Well,
I had been into a lot of the harmony things. I loved all the West Coast.
Well, how did Home come about, and how did you get a record deal with Atlantic?
These periods of time here all are confusing for me. I can't remember the actual logistics of just how all of that happened. If Home was in the middle there, I still can't remember, therefore, how I would have been up in Sydney, because I left Chain. Now, I went over to England, came back. The second Chain reformed.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, maybe, just maybe,
But let's just get
maybe it might have been the second chain that I'm talking about that went to Sydney, right? And that broke up because that would have allowed me the ability to be involved in home, right? So that period of time went on, and then
But how did we form? How did you form home? It was just a bunch of guys that got together, or did you know each other? There's Gunther Gorman, was there?
Trevor Wilson was a friend of mine from the Lardy days.
Oh, okay, right.
So he was the original home bass player.
Ah, okay.
So out of that, I can't exactly remember how we ended up with Gunther and or Loppy. Loppy was in a fairly a known drummer in a fairly rock-orientated Sydney-based band.
And you know, I mean, and to get
that band just got together.
And you got a record deal fairly quickly.
Well, yeah, because Trevor was a premium. He had a lot of songs. And I think between that and whatever, but we were playing around quite a lot.
Right.
You know, like most bands who were offered deals, usually they came much later after the band's formation. It wasn't to do with the band as it started. And a record company went, oh, we're going to, you know, you guys are amazing. It was like they would have heard about you live, generally. And, you know, in those days, the A&R departments were always going out looking for bands and all the rest of the stuff. So someone probably saw us because we used to play quite a lot in Sydney and went, oh, well, you know, these guys do this and they do a lot of their own songs, blah, blah, blah. So that's probably...
Well, let's jump over now to Ariel. And the first Ariel album to come out. And, you know, we know that they had...
that was the first band, though, with Timmy Gaze.
Exactly.
John Mills, I think his name was.
Yeah.
Nigel, Bill and Mike.
Exactly. And it had quite good success in the UK from some radio airplay and whatever. Not that it did anything huge on the charts, but it did get airplay. He recognised them. And then... You know, we know a few issues happened.
Well, the band folded, and then Michael had the new band, so to speak, right? So he had John Lee and Harvey James, and he'd basically written a new themed piece of music called Jellybat Mutant, right? And when he went over to England with that particular band as part of an EMI deal from my recollection, they didn't like it much.
No.
And they said, well, we want songs like these ones here. Hits, rock and roll, scars, right? I think.
Now, that's where you come in.
No, they'd gone there as a four-piece.
Right.
Only when they returned did I join the band.
And you're on the cover. Are you on the cover of Rock and Roll Scars?
No.
Okay.
No. That was just Harvey.
Right. John Lee.
Bill and Michael.
Right, okay.
And then they came back and were due to go back again as the second half of the deal.
Yes.
Right? So away we trumped off back over to the UK, and we had an agency. Our manager was Phil Jacobson in Australia.
Very famous person in the industry.
And he came over with us, and we had an agency called the March Agency that looked after us, and we were working a bit, which was amazing considering the fact that a lot of English bands weren't. So we worked Glasgow and Southall, and we weren't bad. From my memory, we at least had a gig a week. It wasn't that bad. And we were just about to embark on a German army base tour when EMI decided in their magnanimity to go through a budget reshuffle, and they dropped about 15 bands. Well, our album hadn't even come out over there yet. And
which album are you referring to?
Well, at least probably...
Jellybat Mutant?
No. That might have been like Good Night Fiona.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right.
One of those. And anyway, so they didn't even get there, right? So Philip, tried to help us out and keep us employed there, but it's just impossible. So we came home, and it was only about...
Now, that had to be the late 70s, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Sort of 73. Hang on.
The late...
late 75, 76, because I was only in the band for about 2.5 years.
Right, okay.
Because Stockley See Mason was 78.
Right, that was after Ariel.
Correct.
Right, okay. So,
but in between, I had my own band. Yeah. So I had the loose string band in between with Vicky Dolan and Michael Hegarty on bass, Rick Petrarca.
Which we have some songs out online of that because
of that band.
yeah, because there was no official album, but we have got tracks.
So we came back. Ariel came back from England that second time. It was only about maybe 6 months or so later at Harvey left to join Schubert.
Yeah.
So
John Lee had left early.
yeah, well, he got sacked over there, so we came back with Nigel Macaro.
Did he then go back to the Dingoes?
Well,
Don't know.
I can't remember what happened with all the different sort of personnel, so to speak. But except for Harvey went to Schubert. Nigel was with us, and then he'd gone, and we had Tony Slavich on keyboards, myself, Michael, and Bill, and Ian McLennan on kit. So that was the last Ariel that I worked with. In actual fact, it was the last Ariel. We finished our performance with that double album out at Dallas Books Hall. Yeah, that was that.
So where did you go to after?
Well, pretty much I was like, well, gee, what am I going to do now? Same old story. So I periodically, I think that's when the loose string band came into around about then, and I did that for a while. That lasted, I think we just did some demo songs and stuff. We never released anything, and the thing fell apart. And round about that time was when Chris Stockley and Sam had come back from Canada with Greg Quill. And they finished their last gig at the Station Hotel.
Ex-Country Radio. Yeah, right.
What are we going to do now?
Yes.
And neither of us can really sing. Who do we get? So with that fabulous scene of me walking out of some pawn shop. There was no Acting Academy Awards then. So, and a lot of your followers on Laneway can sort of see the hilarity of that on YouTube. So around about then, 78 was when Stockley See started, and away we went. And really, we fell into an amazing void within that first 16-month period. Richard Clapton was off the road, Stars had come off the road for a while, and so we had this blend of country rock-ish things, and we were a lot more countrified when we first started. Sam was playing lap steel and Chris played a lot of mandolin. We did some sort of crazy stuff. But then as time went by, it became a lot more edged towards the rock side. And all of our actual facts.
Had you known Chris Stockley and Sam C?
Yeah.
Quite
a little bit with Sam. I'd know Chris a lot.
Because Sam being Flying Circus and Chris being Dingoes, yeah. So,
but Sam had gone, right? He'd been gone with Flying Circus and his time in Canada, I don't know, maybe let's just say 5 years or something.
Yeah.
He'd been gone a long time. But I knew Chris from the Dingoes, and all those sort of bands, Chain, them, every touring band from Sydney, basically played at the station, and the Dingoes were sort of, that was kind of like their home away from
most of those was. Yeah.
But you got to know those guys, and so that's where the connection came with those fellas.
Now, Tour de Force came after that.
Must have.
I think
that's right.
Tour de Force.
What happened out of that is that when Stockley See busted up, and
what we're getting out of it.
I think I was floating around for a while, but Sam kept Stockley See going for a while, at least maybe for another year, with about 2 to 3 different singers that he tried out and a lot more of his songs to keep that sort of world going. But eventually, it died. The record company backed out, certainly from even when I was still in it.
But you'd obviously...
So then Joe, I think one of the last bass players from that was Joe Imbrol, right? Because Jeff had moved on, Jeff Rosenberg, and Joe Imbrol and Dave Stewart and I got together with Tour de Force. That was that band. And we went. And same deal, we worked hard, did a lot of gigs, and in those days a lot of the support acts did all the lugging for the main acts. So I think we were one of the fittest support acts.
Yeah, we've all done that before, there's no doubt about it.
Lugging gear around, and then out of your fee you'd have to pay the sound guy from the main act because they would go just set the desk up for you to do your set. Then you waited for the main act to finish, and then they packed up, and then you helped them blank out. So, your day could have started at about 4 o'clock and finished at about 1 or 2 in the morning. So, but look, it's what was going on.
The amount of gigs in that period that we've spoken about must be phenomenal.
Oh, it was rocking.
Absolutely phenomenal. And look, getting into the 80s, is that when is when did you actually move to Fender to work for Fender?
Well, I shifted back up to Sydney in '84, right? Nothing much to hold me in Melbourne at that particular point because the Stockley See was over. Anything else that I was considering, nothing much had come up. And I went, oh, nothing's holding me here. And Harvey had basically was out of Sherbert at that particular point. The whole thing sort of was over. And he was working with Tony Mitchell from Sherbert and John Lee on drums. And he had this band called The Herdsmen. And, of course, we'd remained friends. Like everybody in all of these outfits, we were all mates still. There was none of this other bizzo we were just talking about before. We were just friends. So Harvey was up there for...
I mean, that must have been a good band. That was a...
Well, we had fun, but it was just a little four-piece. And we had a few gigs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was great fun to play. And again, I just was able to move somewhere and start to play straight away. But he'd just come off a second tour with Richard Clapton.
Yeah.
Harvey.
Yeah.
So I'm up there. I'd shifted up. Yeah, we were playing in this band, and about, I don't know, 3 months later or something like that, he goes, oh, I'm going out on tour with Richard Clapton again, and John Lee's coming with me. So Tony and I looked at each other and said, well, what the hell are we supposed to be doing for like 6 to 8 weeks or whatever the freaking thing was? So, and I just said to Tony, mate, I'm sorry, man, this can't work. Because I had rent to pay and stuff, and I said, it's just impossible. And I was living over at Harbord, sharing a unit with this gal, so I just went, well, look, I can't do that. So I just went out and started doing solo gigs on my own around Manly and Manly Corso and stuff. And around about that time...
Are we talking about this time? Tell me something. I
was just saying, around about that time... a few of my mates, Jeff Rosenberg was waiting around up there, and Tony Slavich, from Ariel and stuff, he'd gone back up to close to home. And we got this thing together called Baby Loves to Cha-Cha, which was a soul covers band.
Which we have an album out.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So that sort of happened there. We all remained friends, and then in that band, I lost my voice again for the second time in my career. By trying to sound like a fabulous soul singer, and I wasn't one in real terms.
Stretch yourself too far.
Yeah, and so I thought, you know what, this must be a bit of a signal, I think. So I opted out, and I just formed my own partnership in landscaping in Sydney for 2 years, which came and went inside 2 years because the second year was the highest rainfall in Sydney for 42 years, and huge multi-million-dollar concrete companies stuff went under the girdle. I lost thousands of jobs, and it rained for about 7 months pretty much all the time, and we couldn't do work. Obviously, you couldn't do footings, and it was all over. And I had a mortgage by this stage, and I went, oh man, you're kidding me, right? Okay, so I just went to my partner and said, here's my tools. If you want to buy these, I'm out. And had no idea what I was going to do. Zero. And Harvey was working at Fender already as a rep.
Yeah.
And he just said, oh, there's a gig in the warehouse going, mate, do you want it? And I went, I'm in.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I owed the tax department about $3,000 or $4,000 or something.
Which would have been a lot of money back then, yeah.
Stayed at Fender and pretty much was there for 21 years.
Wow.
To 2010.
Well, when did you, so that being your day gig, when did you write It's Only Love?
I have no idea.
Was that something that was around in your pocket for a long time?
Not too long before, it must have been in the Ariel days, because Ariel was one of the first bands to play at Daydream Island.
Oh, yes.
Sundays when it was some Ansett hangout.
Yeah, Hamilton Island.
No, Daydream.
Daydream. I know Daydream.
Yeah. And we were one of the first rock bands to play there, and they gave us a junket, right, over about 5 days, and we only played one day.
Yeah.
Right, so everyone just went absolutely ballistic.
Yeah.
On the island, they had, a little drink bar, of course, in the resort. And we were there getting, absolutely tailored one night.
Yeah.
I think so. There's Michael. Somebody said, "Well, why don't you get up and sing a song or something?" Because I just used to dabble around on acoustic myself, right? And I must have written the song then because I actually sang it on that night in the bar. And then Michael said, well, why don't we record that song? And and it's been, I think I told you when I first met you, and because you already had Michael on board in your stable of artists. And I said to Michael, and I said, it doesn't really fit in with Ariel's songs, because he and I had written sort of co-wrote a couple together almost. And I said, "No, I joined your band to play your songs. I don't want to play my songs, because they were still sort of country rockish,
Yes.
so to speak, or pop orientated." I said, "I don't really want to play it." Anyway, he said, no, and of course, I think it was quite successful as a turntable hit for Ariel.
So it's on the Goodnight Fiona album.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Michael, just to diverge a little bit, I think he had a difficult, how you go for time, mate? I think he had a difficult time for a while, and radio wasn't going to give him a crack, as you know. So I think he saw it, maybe as a twofold plan, because if I wrote a song and we put it out as Ariel, then Ariel wouldn't be the just recognised as such. It was this sort of new band. So anyway, look, strangely enough, it sort of seemed to work.
Well, it's a song that's weathered the test of time. It sounds as good today as it obviously did the day you wrote it.
I think it's just, I'm going to say...
And it's a great acoustic song. It doesn't need to be electrified.
Well, look, I think a lot, like, honestly, if you really went back to some of the greatest songs ever, that's probably how they were originally formulated.
Yeah.
You look at Paul McCartney with Blackbird, right? He could just play that song. He could play that song on his own. No accompaniment, if you get my drift, and it would be just as good as it was on the album.
Well, you've
which
said
is pretty much how it is on the album, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But you look at those sort of songs by the Eagles, they would have just been written on a couple of acoustic guitars, and you go, wow.
Well, you've said to me before that you're not a prolific writer, and then I look at the collection of songs by Glyn Mason, and I beg to differ because I think we're probably up to 10 albums or so.
Yeah, I think some of them were the trial periods, though, that you've got on album, as you well know, because I think I told you, when you'd made your albums up and you've got them on Laneway there, and you can check it out on Spotify, it was just like, and I was around at a Fred's place, and they just put some wireless speakers in their roof, and my phone couldn't operate Spotify because it didn't have the operating system on.
Yeah.
So I borrowed his, and I said, would you mind if because Vincent, this friend of mine, he's just got this new company out, and he's got some stuff of mine. So I went on, and some of that early stuff that I gave you, those bloody 2-inch, quarter-inch bloody tapes and everything, that you edited and threw up there, and I went, who's singing that song? It's not mine. Who the hell's that? And I couldn't even recognise myself. So that's how stupid it got,
Yeah.
And I listened to about 4 or 5 tracks. I'm going, I can't ever remember writing it, even if I did, or singing it.
Yeah, there's some great tracks there.
But look, I think that's the same for a lot of people who write. For me, a lot of it was a strange but unfortunate exercise because I was in some band and, I just used to sort of sit there and doodle and dabble away.
Yeah.
Sometimes people said, well, I like that song, maybe we should, like Michael, let's just do that. And other times, like I'm sure just as many writers, there's a lot of songs that people will never hear if you get my drift. It's like, I think I named, a whole bunch of prolific, fabulous songwriters, Neil Finn being one, right? Well, he's probably got as many songs that he's recorded sitting in file at his home that people will never hear, right? That you and I would sit there and go, man, why don't you release that, But they're not. And I don't know whether he's, given a lot to other people, but that's the circumstance. So I actually never really thought of myself as a serious writer. Neither did I ever follow it as a discipline, right? The really good writers, it's a discipline, right? You'll find a lot of them getting up at like 9 and 10 o'clock and they sign off at about 5 and they're at it all day. And if you go to that history of the Eagles, and they mentioned about Jackson Brown because he was a friend of theirs when they first started to try and do stuff. And Glenn Frey, I think it was, lived downstairs from him. And he said every day I could wake up to go and get a cup of coffee and Jackson would be upstairs and he'd be writing all day, right? So to me, that's what sort of a songwriter is, like someone who's really applied and has this ability to throw shit together. Brian Cadd, who I work with, he's another one of those kind of dudes. He just writes stuff. Comes out of his brain, you know.
But, you know, I think when we have a look at your catalogue, it's prolific and...
Oh, look, I think there's some good... Don't get me wrong, I think there's some good songs in there. And other people have forwarded them to other people on my behalf. Or they thought they were good, so they've shoved them out there in sort of no man's land, hoping that they might be picked up. I mean, Chris Stockley knew a member of Bonnie Raitt's road crew, I think it was, and shipped them over my song off the Furs Partners CD, I'd Rather Be Tied With You, which I think stands up as a song.
I think the calibre of songs and the rich history of bands that you've played with and as an individual is testament to what kind of musician you are. Anyway, we'd like to thank you for coming and talking to us today, Glyn, and we look forward to the new album when it comes from Glyn Mason. Thanks very much.
No worries, mate. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, there you have it, another Laneway Talks. If you enjoyed that, just search Laneway Talks for more great conversations.